Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at CDK Live at NADA 2024. I am so excited to be here with our CEO and President, Brian MacDonald, and with John Casesa, who is an industry thought leader, been in the industry for a long time, started his career at GM, worked at Ford, Argo AI. He also was one of the leading analyst on Wall Street for the automotive industry for over a decade, and he helped start Guggenheim Securities, where he's at today. So welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Barb. Great to be here.
So you two have a little bit of a history, I hear. They've been having a good time catching up. How do you know each other?
So a long time ago, for both John and I worked in investor relations at General Motors, and John was the #1 ranked institutional investor auto analyst, and so he was my customer. And I was trying to convince him why he should try to convince people to buy GM stock.
And I think you were successful at that, because I think I had a buy in the stock at that time. You know,
that was a long time ago. So we've both been in the industry a long time.
That's great. That's great. Well, let's get started. So, Brian, we've been here. You've been here for a few days already. You talk to dealers every day. What are you hearing from dealers that are top of mind for 2024?
Yeah, I think as we are already closed the month of January, I think if I summed it up in some short words, I would say return to normalcy. Inventory's back, reaching normal levels. Incentives are moving up. We have to figure out how to sell cars again. And profitability's trending down from COVID levels, but still above pre-COVID levels, which is very good.
Yeah, we heard about that yesterday on a dealer panel that you introduced as well. So, John, how about you? You work a lot with OEMs. What are you hearing from them on what's on tap for 2024?
well, I think it's a year where they're finally catching their breath post-COVID, and having had enough time to absorb the trends in electrification and technology change and the market, are beginning to make decisions about how to evolve their business. And what I mean by that is Tesla's been a very important model for the industry, and I think it's now beginning to absorb these lessons in how to go to market, how to change the product line, and how to be realistic about what will sell. You know, the kind of the hype, the industry went from, I don't believe in electric cars, to I got to get there tomorrow.
Right.
And I think 2024 is starting to say, well, what's real? What's really going to work in light of the regulatory requirements, which are stringent, and the market requirements, the customer demands, which are different. So I think this is the year they're going to kind of reconcile the difference between the political agenda and the consumer agenda, which is a very difficult spot to be in.
Great, great. Well, since we're here at a bit of a technology-focused conference, and we know we just had CES here in Las Vegas, and there was a lot of talk about EV, really that software-defined vehicles, but what we know from our research is that it's causing a lot of issues, a lot of service calls, actually consumer reports declining on a lot of vehicles. So technology is great, but what do you think OEMs, what are you hearing, John, from OEMs about the technology, and what impact will it have on them?
Well, it's an overwhelming impact. It's like going from a phone that was plugged in the wall, which we knew a lot about, to a smartphone. So, this profoundly affects what the product is, how it's repaired, how people use it. So I would say it's the beginning of a very long period of adjustment to understand really how these new devices are going to be in the real world.
Yep.
Whether they'll break down, what people like and don't like, how dealers take care of customers. It's just an overwhelming, multi-year, probably multi-decade change.
So, Brian, what about dealers? What do you think the impact for dealers is going to be?
Well, I think the dealers are trying. There's two aspects of the tech changes. So, first you have the changing consumer buying experience. Which everyone is trying to figure out. Some consumers want to do more online and not come in the store less. Some consumers still want a very traditional experience. So how do dealers find the right blend for the customer experience that individual customer wants? And then you have, as John mentioned, the EV transition, which is now becoming real. Like EV sales are still growing as a % of sales. They're not growing as fast as the OEMs have created capacity. And so that has to be reconciled. And then dealers need to figure out, how many charging stations I need to have, how do I train my techs, how do I get the right equipment in my bay to deal with electric vehicles. Some of the electric vehicles burn through tires a lot faster than traditional cars. How are they going to think about servicing the customers around that? Yep. So there's a lot of changes that come with the changes in the product, but also the changes in the buying experience, and they're both happening at the same time.
Yep. Awesome. So, John, so that's sort of kind of the new technology, but there's still, it's not just about the new technology. What about sort of the traditional legacy side of the business? What's happening there?
Well, I think from the automaker perspective, what Brian just described is a pervasive change. Almost everything, the product's changing, the way people want to buy is changing. So I think it's really, for the auto companies, it's the technology change is driving a business model change. For example, if we're going to an omni-channel world where, however you do it, customers may want to buy online, they may buy by the store, or something in between. Well, that has big consequences for how you're organized as a business. And so I think it's a real business model change for the auto companies. And it's kind of it's not I go from A to B quickly. I go from ICE cars to electric cars. It's a continuous change, because Brian just went through a dozen big questions that are for dealers. The OEMs have just as many. It's going to take many, many years to figure out the right answer for the right automaker for these questions. So I think my main point is I think it's a business model change for the auto companies, and a lot of it has to do with interacting with the consumer.
Great, great. So a lot of new entrants in the industry. So, and people talk a lot about the dealership model, and is it relevant in this new world? We see companies like Fisker actually starting to talk about or create a franchise dealership model. Brian, what do you think the trend's going to be? Because we obviously believe in the dealership model, but what about the new entrants?
So it's really interesting. I think when Brookfield acquired CDK, we like to say that we made an $8.5 billion bet on the dealership model. And I think what we're starting to see now with the new entrants, who all came into the market with a direct-to-consumer approach, now they're realizing distribution's actually hard. It's really hard. And so I think of the world as you kind of have Tesla, and then you have everybody else. And I think most of the other players are really struggling with distribution. They're also struggling with capital. They got capital, during SPAC mania, as I would call it. Money was free and easy for everybody. Those days are over. And so, dealers are very effective at what they do. And I think, VinFast has announced, they're going to have a dealer model. Fisker has announced that they're going to have a dealer model. And, for some of the other companies out there, Tesla aside, I think, we'll see that trend as well. And then I always remind people, Tesla has dealers too. They're just Tesla dealers. You take your car to get serviced at Tesla, you go there to try the car, you pick the car up there.
They have to perform those functions.
Yeah, it's a dealership just owned by Tesla.
Yeah, and I think, the operative phrase is capital, because to satisfy the customer as a new entrant, you have to have staying power. So you want to own your own stores, that's one thing, or if you want to go another way, but you have to have staying power to get it right, to deal with repairs, to deal with service, to know you're going to be in business. And if the capital dries up, it's going to be difficult for these new entrants. But as Brian pointed out, there are new entrants that are going to the dealership model, and I'm going to guess that BYD and others are going to do that, because on top of the model being so robust, dealers are pretty powerful advocates for the brands in their markets. And if you're a new brand, you can't assume that just because you're online that people will know what you're all about. Right. Unless you have the money to spend till the cows come home till they figure it out. Yeah. And almost no one does.
Well, and if you think about, I'm not here to sell cars or brands, but if you think about the most successful brands, what do they have? They have really good vehicles and really good dealers, and really good relationships between the manufacturer and the dealers. Yeah. And so I think you really can't be successful in this business if you have great vehicles, but not a great distribution model, or vice versa. You got to really have both.
Yeah, that actually leads us to a question, John, we really wanted you to hit on, which was that relationship between the OEM and the dealership. And you're working a lot with OEMs and starting to see some transformation in that relationship. So can you touch on some of those?
Well, yeah, so Brian, I sent you an email a couple of months ago because I just come out of a meeting that the light bulb went off for me that it seems like the auto companies and the dealers, and I mean in a very broad sense, are saying if we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately. And I think I wrote to you and said, wow, that has really important implications for the business you're in and all these other businesses. And I think that it gets to this whole debate around, is the franchise model or is it direct and all that? What really matters is the consumer's expectations. Yep. And they don't care how you deliver them. Right. You know, they don't care about omni-channel or franchise model, anything like that. And I think there's a realization in the industry, I'm sensing a turning point that says if we are really have a common understanding of what we have to deliver together, then we have a shot at this. If it continues to be that we're, kind of in a Cold War, we're in this, but we don't sort of trust each other so much, that's problematic. But the companies you've described, and some have been very good at this, have achieved that commonality of thinking, and I think now there's sort of a dawning on the industry that that's got to happen, because the enemy is not, the enemy is a radically different way of doing things, whether it's Tesla or the Chinese or something else we haven't seen yet. It's not GM versus Ford versus Toyota.
Absolutely, that's a really great point. Brian, can you talk about the role that CDK can play in sort of bridging that gap of that relationship between the OEM and the dealerships?
So I think what's really unique and special about our company is if you think about the way that business works, you have an OEM, you have a dealer, and you have a retail customer. And who sits in the middle of that? CDK. And CDK is the system of record for 55% of the vehicles sold in North America. CDK is the system of record for 53% of the repair orders opened up and processed in North America. So who could be better to help those parties come together from a technology perspective to create the consumer experience that you want for your brand? Every brand wants a little different consumer experience because the products are different, the customers are different. But who can do that better than CDK with our footprint? And I always say to our employees, I mean, yes, this is a huge opportunity for us, but this is actually our obligation to the industry.
And if it were easy, somebody would have done it already. So it does seem to me that, when you start with a clean sheet of paper, in a way it's easier if you have enough time and money. But when you're retrofitting a system that's been around a long time, that's a lot of work. And I think if something like that doesn't happen, then the whole system is in jeopardy. Because really the competitive advantage of the franchise system, which is quite significant, will go away over time.
Yeah, so one last question. So 2024, a lot of change. So just a lot of change across the industry. So we'd really like to end with, Brian, you talking about what's your advice to dealers on how to adapt to all of that change? And then John, we'll have you talk about your advice to OEMs to sort of parting words on how to really thrive in a world of change.
Yeah, I think, look, my advice for dealers would be focus on the basics, treat the employees right, so you retain your best employees, get back to the basics of selling and servicing cars. A lot of bad habits were formed in COVID, and there's a lot of unhappy customers that bought cars during COVID, and you got to earn them back. And so I think really the basics are going to be fundamental. Interest rates are going to continue to be high, so that's an added expense for dealers. Inventory will continue to normalize. Incentives are going to creep up. And so I think it's really a year of getting back to the basics and really focus. Profitability is going to trend down. It's already happening. And so really I think really the core. And then I think the broader theme that we've been talking about is really for dealers and OEMs to work together. Yep. Because if they don't work together, then the new entrants are going to continue to take share. from the franchise model, and that's not good for the dealers, and that's not good for the OEMs.
And it's not good for the consumers.
Exactly.
We see the consumer impact in our research. So, John, how about from an OEM perspective?
And I think for the auto companies, which in some way it's even more challenging than for the dealers because returns on capital are lower and there's global changes that, and regulatory changes that are almost inescapable. Probably the most important thing is to husband your capital. And because the transition into new technologies, new business models, for some period of time you're launching new electric cars, you're maintaining ICE cars and something in between, it just costs so much money. So I think that maintaining a very strong capital base is essential. And then probably the second thing related to this conversation is to be very critical about where you can win, where you're better for the customer, where you have a right to play in that kind of product or market, and get out of the places where you can't because you need that capital.
Right.
Yep. Well, that's great. Well, that's all the time we have today at CDK Live, but join us. We've got sessions going all day. Thank you again,
Thanks,
John
Barb.
and
Thanks,
Brian.
Barb.
Great job.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.